Hi, I'm Harry Wingfield from the UCF IRB staff. This module covers common mistakes made in IRB submissions and how to avoid making them. For the next few slides, we will discuss some common mistakes researchers make in their IRB submissions and how to prevent them. The most common mistakes include using outdated forms, copying and pasting from a previous study, and improper document uploads. To avoid these mistakes, you should use the most recent forms from the Huron library and tailor each submission to the specific research study being developed. You should also use the update feature when uploading changes to documents. More on that coming up. IRB forms and templates are changed frequently. Always go to the IRB library in Huron to ensure that you are using the most recent version of a form. Your submission will get sent back for corrections if you use an outdated form. Copying and pasting from another study or adapting another protocol to your research can make your submission very difficult for the IRB reviewers to understand, because there will likely be elements from the previous study that you forgot to delete or change. Make sure you only include information that applies to your study. If you make changes to an existing document, either in response to a request for changes or when submitting a modification to an approved study, always use the update feature. To do this, go to the section of the application where the current document is attached and click Update, and then upload a clean copy of the revised version with no tracking or comments. Do not click Add and do not click Delete the existing version unless your IRB reviewer tells you to. More on this coming up next. The IRB strongly prefers that all documents be in Word format. This allows the update system in Huron to work when there are revisions and makes it possible for the IRB reviewers to quickly spot changes without doing a line-by-line comparison. Use this update process, a description is coming up, when you respond to requests for changes and when you are making modifications to an approved document later on. The protocol and the consent form must always be in Word format. Using Word for all your documents will make the IRB processes go much faster, especially if these documents require changes. Here are the instructions for updating a document. You go to the section of the application where the current document is attached. You click Update, not Add and not Delete. When you click Update, then upload the revised version. This keeps all the versions of the document stacked in Huron and allows us to compare your document with the most recent previous version. Make sure the document you update is clean, with no track changes and no comments. It is not enough to resolve a comment. You have to delete it. We cannot stamp a document that has comments in the margins or has track changes in the content. Now, many other IRBs do request track changes documents. UCF does not. Within the UCF Huron system, it is best that we have clean documents that are ready for us to finalize and stamp. Our system has a feature that does a document comparison that shows us the changes. We don't need the track changes, we create them. This only works, though, if all the documents are free of tracking and free of comments. Delete a comment by clicking on the three dots in the upper right corner of the comment and selecting Delete this thread. Accept the track changes by going to the Review tab, clicking the drop-down menu for Accept, and then click Accept All Changes. Be sure and look at the changes first to make sure that you agree with them, and double-check the clean document afterwards to make sure there were no typos in the track changes. Important: if you are doing a survey on an online platform and offering monetary compensation, be sure and set up safeguards to prevent bots or other multiple fraudulent submissions. It will also help to state in your informed consent explanation of research that you will only accept one survey per person, and or state that multiple submissions from the same IP address will be discarded. The IRB office is seeing a major increase in fraudulent submissions and bot attacks. We are recommending that all researchers check their security settings of their survey platforms to ensure fraud detection is enabled. Use of CAPTCHAs, attention checking questions, adding an automatic notification to the researcher when a certain number of responses are received, and monitoring the time and speed of survey completion duration can be helpful in preventing and detecting fraudulent responses and or over-enrollment. Qualtrics fraud detection information can be found at the link in the slide, or you can just Google Qualtrics fraud detection. Multiple phases and groups. Your protocol document must cover the entire study, not just the main part. If you have more than one phase with different procedures or subjects for each phase, you must provide information on this in all applicable sections of the protocol document, including the enrollment, procedures, recruitment, consent process, and others, if the information is different. Make it clear whether subjects in a later phase are new subjects or if they are a subset of the earlier phase. Like if you're doing a survey of 300 people and then choosing 15 of the survey respondents to do an interview or focus group. The same applies if different groups are taking part. For instance, if you are interviewing clients at a free clinic and surveying providers at a free clinic, or vice versa, both groups are study participants. Information on both groups must be included in all applicable protocol sections. The same applies if you are interviewing or surveying providers and are also reviewing medical records of their patients. The providers and the patients are study participants. Information on both groups must be included in all applicable protocol sections. And here's a question. What is the best way to add a revised document to a protocol? Choice 1, email the revised document to the IRB. Choice 2, use the update process to stack the revised document where the previous document is. Choice 3, delete the previous document and upload the revised document. Or choice 4, leave the previous document and add the revised one. And the correct answer is 2, use the update process. Emailing or messaging the IRB with the revised document does not get the document into the Huron system. Do not delete documents and do not add revised documents without using update. Are you having trouble finding the Submit button? Only the person listed as the principal investigator in the Huron submission has access to the Submit button. Remember, you should be the PI of the study. If you can't find the Submit button, then you need to make yourself the PI. Do not oversell your research in any of your recruitment materials. Avoid terms like exciting new study and groundbreaking research. And do not emphasize compensation. Any mention of compensation must be in the same font size and color as the surrounding text. Don't procrastinate. Every time there is a deadline for FIRE students, the IRB staff is overwhelmed by last-minute submissions and frantic messages and calls from students who waited until the last minute to send their project in for review. While we empathize with your need to make your deadline, we have to be fair to all the researchers at UCF. We can't let your submission cut in line just because you did not plan ahead. Submissions are reviewed in the order received. If you do not respond within 30 days to requests for clarifications and changes, your submission is withdrawn until you respond to the requests. Once the study is withdrawn, your submission date will become the date you respond and not the date you initially submitted. Your submission goes back to the end of the line. To keep your place in line, respond quickly. We advise you to send your submissions at least 6 weeks before you need the approval. This gives you plenty of time to let the IRB reviewers do their job and for you to respond to requests for changes and clarifications. Perfect submissions almost never happen. Don't count on an immediate approval. Count on the IRB reviewer needing more information. Now, if you haven't heard from the IRB for more than 2 weeks after your submission, first, double check to make sure you hit submit. If your submission status is pre-submission, that means you haven't sent it to us yet. That's why you haven't heard from us. If your status is pre-review, that means we have it. Email irb@ucf.edu if your submission has been in pre-review for more than 2 weeks. Then be patient. During the fall deadline season, it may take 2 or 3 weeks for a coordinator to review your submission. Every time we have to stop to look up your submission and to respond to your question, it slows our review time down for every submission in our queue. Follow all the instructions on your forms. Answer all the questions. Everywhere the form asks for details, provide an answer, even if the answer is not applicable. If you are using the HRP 503 for your protocol document, follow the format of the template, maintain that format while editing, and address each subsection or bullet point. In the General tab in the Huron Library, we have annotated template forms for the HRP 255 for exempt review and the HRP 503 for expedited review. Use these as your guide when you are completing your protocol document. They tell you what information the IRB needs to see in each section, subsection, and bullet point. Do not change the formatting on the template forms. The sections, subsections, and bullet points must remain intact. Be careful that you are not accidentally adding new subsections or bullet points, especially in the HRP 503 form. Look over the template form before you start completing your document. Notice which topics have their own section. For instance, there is a section for the consent process and a section for written documentation of consent. You can mention when the consent process takes part in your study procedures when you're completing section 6.2 for study procedures, but the full details of the consent procedures should go into section 22, consent process, and section 23, process to document the consent in writing. The same goes for recruitment, confidentiality, risks, and many other topics. Use the annotated forms to help you figure out where to put your information. Things that slow down your approval. Not distinguishing between research and standard activities is a very common error that we see. For instance, if you are evaluating members of a sports team and using the team's internal testing results as part of your analysis, make sure that the team's internal testing is done regardless of your research. The UCF IRB only needs to review and approve the procedures you are doing only because of the research study. Another example, your study is evaluating the mental health effects of gardening therapy. You must make it clear in the submission and in the protocol and in the consent forms that your research is only the evaluation if the gardening therapy intervention is happening regardless of your research. The IRB only needs to review your plan to evaluate the gardening therapy. We will not need to evaluate the gardening therapy process if it is not part of your research. A program evaluation is usually a very simple not human subjects research submission using the short HRP 250 form. An approval for a mental health intervention would require at least expedited review, if not full board review, requiring much longer submission documents, including a full consent form. That's why it's important that we know what is the research component and what would happen even if the research is not done. Before you send your submission to the IRB, proofread all your documents and within each document to make sure your information is consistent. For instance, don't say in one place that you plan to enroll men and women and then say in another document that you are only enrolling women. Make sure your procedures and enrollment projections and estimated time that the participants will be involved are the same everywhere they are listed. This is also why we discourage copying and pasting from another study. Your study may use questionnaires and survey documents. The IRB reviewer will have to match each instrument listed in Huron with the instruments listed in your protocol. You must make it easy for your reviewer to find the documents listed in the protocol and match them with those listed in Huron and vice versa. Use the same file names. If your Huron document combines several individual instruments like demographics, caffeine intake, current exercise routines, and all of these are combined into the screening surveys document in Huron, list them in the protocol as demographics in screening surveys, caffeine intake in screening surveys, and current exercise routines in screening surveys. Make sure the screening surveys document has clear headers showing each individual survey so that the IRB reviewer can match them. Write to your audience. Each document you develop in the life of your study has a different audience. Your research proposal or your funding application is reviewed by experts in your field and should use specific scientific terms. However, the protocol that you ask the IRB to review will be reviewed by people who may not be familiar with these scientific terms. Use plain language. Follow the IRB template form carefully to make sure you are providing all the required information. Finally, your consent form will be read by students or people from the community. Use words and phrases that an average 8th grader will understand. Avoid long sentences. Break them into smaller sentences and/or bullet points. In your consent form, speak to the subject. You will do this, not participants will do this. The protocol is talking about the participants. The consent form is talking to the participants. Think about who will be reading your documents. What level of expertise do they have? How much do they know about lipid imbalance and other medical terms? Will a participant know what hyperlipidemia means? Say something like high cholesterol or high levels of fat in your blood instead. If you're not sure of a plain language definition, use Google to find one. What does each audience need to know? How should the information be organized? You will probably find that the IRB protocol templates do not follow the same structure as the documents you completed for your original proposal or for your funding application. When you start on your IRB protocol document, I recommend that you look over the template carefully to see where the information goes. Notice, for instance, that there is a whole section to describe your consent process. So in your list of study procedures, you should mention when your consent process will occur, but then wait until you get to the section for consent process before you provide those details. Remember, we have an annotated HRP 255 and HRP 503 form available in the library under the General tab to help you figure out what each question is asking. Be specific in your protocol. We get a lot of protocols and consent forms that say we are conducting the study at a large university in Central Florida. That probably works for your funding application, but the IRB and your participants want specifics. We are conducting the study at UCF in this building and this room number. This slide applies for expedited and full board studies only. If your study does not involve direct or indirect interaction with participants, it may qualify for a waiver of consent. This means you do not have to obtain verbal or written consent. For instance, if you are reviewing records from months or years ago and have no way to contact the people whose records you are accessing, you can request a waiver of consent, which means there will be no consent process. Most research that involves interaction with participants will require a consent process. That process could be verbal or it could be written. You may need to obtain a signature depending on what you are asking them to do. Sometimes it's appropriate not to give them a copy of the consent, like if all they are doing is completing a survey. But sometimes they need a copy of the consent to remind them of what they are expected to do for a study that lasts more than one day. Or they may want a record of what they have agreed to do. If they sign the consent form and the researcher signs the consent form and you give them a copy of the signed forms, then you have met all the requirements for full documentation of consent. Otherwise, you will need to state that you are requesting a waiver of document of consent. This is different than waiver of consent because there will be a consent process, but the process is not fully documented. Note that other IRBs may have different definitions or criteria for documentation of consent. If you say you are following HRP 091 for documentation of consent, add clarification in the protocol that the subject will receive a copy of the signed consent. If you can't state that, then you need to request a waiver of consent documentation. UCF IRB requires subjects to receive a signed copy in order for us to consider it meeting the full definition of documentation of consent. If you are not providing a copy of the signed consent, you also need to state whether the participants will receive a copy of an unsigned consent form. The IRB needs this information for our records. You will also need to request a waiver of documentation of consent if you have a consent form but are not requiring participants to sign it. And here's a question. Your subjects sign a consent form but don't get a signed copy. Which of these is true? Choice 1, you need to request a waiver of consent documentation. Choice 2, you are following HRP 091 for the consent documentation process. Choice 3, you need to request a waiver of consent, or choice 4, none of the above. The correct answer is 1. If you are not providing participants with a signed copy, you are not following HRP 091, and you must request a waiver of consent documentation. You're still conducting a consent process, so requesting a waiver of consent is not applicable. Another question. What can speed up your approval process? Choice 1, making sure the consent form is written in plain language. Choice 2, clearly distinguishing between research procedures and procedures that would be done regardless of the research. Choice 3, making sure the documents mentioned in the protocol and those uploaded in Huron can be easily matched. And choice 4, all of the above. The correct answer is 4, all of the above. Confidentiality versus privacy. Remember, confidentiality refers to protection of data, what you are recording, and where and for how long you are storing it. Privacy refers to protecting the subject from unnecessary invasions of privacy. This slide applies to expedited and full board review studies only. The annotated HRP 503, available in the General tab in the Huron IRB library, will help you put the right information in the right places and will cover important definitions. We get a lot of submissions when the investigator does not realize the study is a clinical trial. If you are evaluating the effects of an intervention on health-related biomedical or behavioral outcomes, it meets the definition of clinical trial. An endpoint in research is not when the study ends. It is the event or outcome you are measuring to determine if your intervention is beneficial. A statistically significant difference in benefit between the experimental arm and the control arm would be an endpoint. 5% improvement in health outcomes would be an endpoint that you might be looking for to evaluate your intervention. For more than minimal risk studies, you also need a safety endpoint to determine what events might cause you to remove someone from the study early, or close a study arm early, or close the study early. For instance, If adverse events happen in more than 4% of participants after the first 20 subjects complete, the study will be stopped. This is an example of a safety endpoint. An intervention is defined as physical procedures by which information or biospecimens are gathered and/or manipulations of the subject or the subject's environment that are performed for research purposes. Your procedures in the protocol and consent form must be consistent. Keeping both in chronological order helps your IRB reviewer check this easily and quickly. And here's the big one. This is why I'm mentioning it several times. If your study has survey instruments, the IRB reviewer has to make sure everything in the Huron list is also mentioned in the protocol, and everything in the protocol is uploaded into the Huron list. Use file names that can be easily matched. Double check that the lists in Huron and the documents in your protocol are consistent. You can cut hours and even days off the review time for your submission. And yes, this is another reason why we discourage copying and pasting from another protocol. And here's a question. What is true about an endpoint? Choice 1, it is when you have completed study enrollment. Choice 2, it applies to all research studies. Choice 3, it's an event that would make you withdraw a participant. And choice 4, an outcome that indicates your intervention is beneficial. The correct answer is 4, an outcome that indicates your intervention is beneficial. Endpoints only apply in clinical trials. An event that would make you withdraw a participant is a safety endpoint. That's the end of Module 8. In the next module, which is the final module, I will talk about sending your study to the IRB, what happens once you get your approval, and how to set up meetings with IRB staff.